Not only is AI taking all of the software engineering jobs, but it's also making all of the developers illiterate. Hi, my name is Nick Cosentino, and I'm a Principal Software Engineering Manager at Microsoft. The other day on my Code Commute channel, I was talking about an article that was posted on the Primogens subreddit, and this article is something that we're going to be going over in this video. I'm going to give you my perspective on it because this is something that I did a stream of consciousness vlog about on Code Commute. Now, as we go through this video, I'm going to read through the article, give you my perspective on what this individual is saying, and I want to make sure that we keep an open mind and try to look at multiple angles of what's being said. As software engineers, I think that it's a really good opportunity that we can consider different perspectives, even if we don't necessarily agree with them, and that way we can do better analysis and form better opinions. So if that sounds interesting, just a reminder to subscribe to the channel, check out Code Commute, and check out that pinned comment for my courses on Dome Train. Let's jump over to Reddit. Alright, so on the Primogens subreddit here, this was posted 3 days ago at the time of recording, and this is titled, AI is creating a generation of illiterate programmers. So there's lots of discussion going on here, and so I thought this was really interesting. It caught my attention, and just because I mentioned it, I did make a Code Commute video, which you can see here on my screen, so if you're interested, you can go check out Code Commute. I post multiple videos a day when I'm commuting to or from CrossFit or to or from work, and that way you can have some software engineering added to your commute, or if you're just working around the house doing chores. Okay, so now let's jump over to the article and read through this together. Now, this article is posted on Naminye's blog. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his or her name correctly, and let's jump into it. So AI is creating a generation of illiterate programmers, and I like the way that this article is written, by the way. It's kind of like a nice little story, and then they kind of go into some of the other details towards the end. So let's say a couple of days ago, cursor went down during the ChatGPT outage. I stared at my terminal facing those red error messages that I hate to see. An AWS error glared back at me. I didn't want to figure it out without AI's help. After 12 years of coding, I'd somehow become worse at my own craft, and this isn't hyperbole. This is the new reality for software developers. All right, so interesting start right there. Feeling like they're very dependent on AI. So the decay, it crept up on me subtly. First, I stopped reading documentation. Why bother when AI could explain things instantly? Then my debugging skills took the hit. Stack traces now feel unreproachable without AI. I don't even read error messages anymore. I just copy and paste them. I've become a human clipboard, a mere intermediary between my code and an LLM. This is awesome language. I love it. So previously, every error message used to teach me something. Now, the solution appears magically, and I learn nothing. The dopamine hit of instant answers has replaced the satisfaction of genuine understanding. Deep comprehension is the next thing that was affected. Remember spending hours understanding why a solution works? Now I simply implement AI suggestions. If they don't work, I improve the context and just ask the AI again. It's a cycle of increasing dependency. Then come the emotional changes. Previously, it was part of the joy of programming to solve new problems. Now I get frustrated if AI doesn't give me a solution in 5 minutes. And the scariest part, I'm building an AI-powered development tool, but I can't shake the feeling I'm contributing to the very problem that's eroding our collective skills. Sounds very doom and gloom. Kind of interesting, right? They're calling out that they have been developing for 12 years, and now it's like they're so dependent on the AI tools, and they're noticing this vicious cycle. So what's interesting, though, is they come up with this rehab plan, as they've worded it, and we're going to read through that now. So I'm not suggesting anything radical like going AI-free completely. That's unrealistic. Instead, I'm starting with no AI days, 1 day a week, where read every error message completely, use actual debuggers again, write code from scratch, and read source code instead of asking AI. I won't lie, it sucks. I feel slower, dumber, and more frustrated, but I can also see the difference. I feel stronger connection with my code and a sense of ownership, which had slowly disappeared with AI. Plus, I learn a lot more. So this is interesting, right? We're going to keep reading, but I want you to keep in mind some of the things that are standing out here, right? So they're saying it sucks, and understandably so, because they're used to using tools. And then they say they feel slower, dumber, and more frustrated. Interesting, right? So they're saying slower, dumber, and more frustrated, but they also see the difference, and that is that they have more ownership, and they feel like they're learning more. Kind of an interesting dichotomy going on here. So the uncomfortable truth, we're not becoming 10x developers with AI, we're becoming 10x dependent on AI. There's a difference. Every time we let AI solve a problem we couldn't solve ourselves, we're trading long-term understanding for short-term productivity. We're optimizing for today's commit at the cost of tomorrow's ability. And I think that this is a very interesting statement. This is something that when I read this, it certainly aligns with my perspective, but I want to go through this more. I'm going to try sharing an alternative perspective that, spoiler alert, I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm trying to keep an open mind to because I think that it's very interesting. So they go on to say, I'm not suggesting we abandon AI tools. That ship has sailed. But we need rules of engagement. Here's some ideas that I have. No AI for problems that you haven't tried to understand first. Read and understand all AI suggested solutions. I think these are, this second one for sure is something that I recommend no matter what. You should read and understand anything that you're trying to take and go implement. They say regular periods of coding without AI assistance. Focus on learning patterns, not just fixing immediate issues. They say, I won't lie, I don't think I'll be able to follow these rules all the time. But it's a start, and I strongly believe anyone who's new to programming should definitely follow all those rules. Right now, somewhere, a new programmer is learning to code. They'll never know the satisfaction of solving problems truly on their own. They'll never experience a deep understanding that comes from wrestling with a bug for hours. We're creating a generation of developers who can ask AI the right questions but can't understand the answers. Every time AI goes down, they're exposed as increasingly helpless. As of now, AI isn't capable enough to replace programmers fully, but this will only get worse as it improves. The real question isn't whether AI will replace programmers, it's whether we're replacing ourselves. Try coding without AI for just one day. The results might surprise you. All right, so that's an awful lot to take in. I wanted to give this person a shout out again because I thought that this was very well written. And in particular, I really like that they kind of tell it like a story, and then they go on to give some suggestions about how they're approaching, and then they give some suggestions about how they're going to approach differently their own development process. I wanted to go back through this and touch on some things and kind of take on their perspective, right? Like, let's try to side with them, see things through their lens, and see if this feels like there's relevant points that we can extract some value from, right? So they're going on in this part where they talk about the decay. They're talking about as they're developing things now, right? So they've been a developer for a long time, over 12 years, right? And they're starting to say, like, these things crept up. So all of a sudden, it kind of feels like out of nowhere, but they know it's been over a period of time, that they have things like their debugging skills. They're basically finding that they're more reliant. They're finding that they're just like using AI to solve like whatever the stack traces are. Their like critical thinking ability and problem solving is starting to go away because they're relying on tools. So I think that's interesting. I've certainly found myself using AI for things that I don't necessarily want to spend time on. I've talked about this in previous videos where I might be going to create some SQL tables, different schemas, and I have some basic queries. I don't mind writing SQL, but it gets to a point where I have something a little bit more complicated, and I could go figure it out, but instead of spending the time to go figure it out, I just ask AI to do it. And then I ask it to optimize for different things. So for example, if it gives me back some C# code that's querying the database and it gives me 3 queries, I say, can you try doing this with 1 round trip, right? Can we optimize this for latency? Can we do other things with this? And that way, I'm not spending my own time trying to go write the query and make it better. I don't really have to worry about that anymore. It's interesting because I can acknowledge that I'm not spending time doing that kind of stuff, but at the same time, I would absolutely say that my ability to go do more complex things in SQL, that is going away. I'm not spending time doing it anymore. I think there's probably a lot of things like this that individuals can relate to. So if you're watching this, it might not be SQL queries for you, but you might be finding that you're replacing part of your development process with things like AI, being able to ask it questions or go do things, tasks that you don't really want to do in your development process. And I think for some developers, maybe ones that are completely new to programming or individuals that are more comfortable with AI tools, the reliance is growing and growing, right? Like some individuals might not even know how to go code things from scratch, and truly they're just taking things right out of the LLM. I think that is becoming more and more common. So the next part that I want to dive into, though, is that they talk about this rehab plan. And what I think is interesting about their approach, and this is something I want to focus on a little bit here, their perceived solution to this is that they want to consciously be taking breaks from different aspects of leveraging AI. And so they're going on to say that because they've identified some of the spots that they're using AI heavily for, they're trying to say, instead of doing that, I will consciously avoid using AI for these things. I think that for someone in this situation, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad idea. I think it's something that they can try out, especially if they're more concerned about this dependency that they're creating on AI, right? This is something that they've acknowledged for themselves that they don't necessarily like. So I think that's important. One of the takeaways that I want people to have when they're watching this video is that I want people to think about tools. AI for us is a tool. I'm going to switch gears on a little bit to talk about my different perspective on tooling, how tools help us. And in this case, this person's saying, yes, this has been a helpful tool, but it's now reaching a point where they feel like it's compromising other things that they value. So at some point to them, the tool is having a trade-off and they're not happy about that. This is important because I think that other people, including myself, will have a different perspective on this. You might be someone who totally agrees with this individual and you're saying, hey, look, there is an over-reliance. This is a tool people are using and abusing, and it's actually causing more problems. And other people might say the complete opposite. Hey, look, it's a tool. It's doing awesome things. It's helping people. Lean into it. And there's going to be people in the middle of that. So I think everyone's going to have a bit of a different perspective on this. But I think what they're trying to say is for them, there's too much reliance. So they want to be able to step away from it. If we go down a little bit lower, just to touch on this part again where they're talking about not a 10x developer, but 10x more dependent. I do like some of the things that they call out in this section in particular. So I do think that reading and understanding not only all AI suggested solutions, if you're taking code from anywhere, right? If you didn't write it, even if you did write it, you should be understanding what you wrote. Like double check things, make sure you understand it. This is no different than taking stuff from Stack Overflow, from forums, copying it out of, you're pausing a video to go copy down the code. Make sure you understand it. I do like the first point as well. And I think that between the first point for no AI problems that you haven't tried to understand first, and this last one, focus on learning patterns, not just fixing immediate issues. I think that these are 2 points that I'm going to drill into a little bit more that, in my opinion, kind of form up a traditional approach, or what I might consider a traditional approach to going to learn software development. This third one, this is something that I think is very individual. So for example, right now for myself, I don't regularly focus on periods of coding without AI assistance, but that's again because I fall into this category of I don't feel that I'm overusing it, or I don't feel that I'm becoming over-reliant. And I also have some different perspectives about what this person wrote in the first place. However, if you do kind of side with this person and you're saying, hey, I don't want to fall into that category of feeling over-reliant, then I do think that this one here is also a good option. Okay, so 2 things in general that I want to dive into. Like I said, it's going to be this point here at the top and this one down here, right? So the first and the fourth point. And I also want to talk about tooling. And in particular, I want to talk about reliance on tooling. So in Code Commute, when I was first filming this and it was more of a stream of consciousness, that was sort of my first time thinking through some of these things. And I like filming Code Commute because it lets me actually just think about stuff, say it out loud. Maybe sometimes I'll say something and I change my mind because it's the first time the thought's coming together. So it was a good opportunity for me to try and think about this. Now, when I was talking on Code Commute about this content, one of the things that came to mind is that I think that from my own development experience, I have always been heavily reliant on tools. I thought that was kind of an interesting thought because in this article, it's very much talking about how we're so dependent on AI, which I am calling a tool here. So if AI is a tool and we're so dependent on it, well, what about other tools? And when I reflected on my own development experience, I've been so dependent on tools since the very beginning. Now, for me, I am a .NET developer. I love coding in C#, working in .NET, and that means that I've been using Visual Studio for forever. In particular, I love features like the debugger we get. I love the IntelliSense. I love the IDE itself. I know some people don't like Visual Studio. I get it. But my experience working with C# and Visual Studio, I have been so reliant on having Visual Studio. And I think that we can kind of make this a little bit more generic, right? Like, if you're a developer, you probably have an IDE that you like to use. Does that mean that you must have it? Probably not. But are you more effective with it? Yeah. Like, I wouldn't want to program unless I had a good IDE to work in. Now, because I use C#, I like Visual Studio. But if someone said, hey, Nick, you can't use C#, you have to go use JavaScript, which would be the worst. Just kidding. But if I had to go use JavaScript, I would say I want an IDE. I want to go use something that makes me feel like I'm using Visual Studio. And that's going to be Visual Studio Code for me, which is fine. So the point here is that I have a reliance on an IDE. I wouldn't want to go coding anything at all in Notepad or something else that wasn't really integrated. I wouldn't want to go work in an environment that didn't have a debugger attached to it that I could go step through things. I wouldn't want to program without IntelliSense. All of these things are tools and experiences that I've had throughout my entire time being a developer. And I've had them since the beginning. Obviously, they've evolved over time, but these are things that I've gotten used to having the entire time. Does it mean that I couldn't code at all without them? No. Would I want to? Also no. So when this person talks about this extreme dependency on AI, I actually don't really share the same concern, personally. I can absolutely acknowledge where they're coming from, if that makes them uncomfortable. That's not for me to say they're not allowed to feel uncomfortable, but when I was reflecting on this, I don't have that same discomfort. In fact, I've sort of accepted that I rely on a lot of tools. I don't assemble my own code. I really hope that no one's doing that. But I also use a debugger. I also have an IDE with IntelliSense. I also have, you name it. I'm always using tools for things, and if I didn't have some of those core tools, I would really not enjoy the process of developing. So that was the first thing I wanted to call out, and because this is supposed to be a bit of an exercise in considering different perspectives, I wanted to kind of challenge you and think about this, right? I'm not here to say this person's right or wrong, or that I'm right or wrong, but this is my perspective on it, and I'd be curious about yours. So if you're thinking about this, do you also have an over-reliance on tools already? Excluding AI? Or is AI sort of the tipping point for you? Are you totally content programming and developing with minimal tools? Because I'm personally not, but that might be very different for you. Okay, the last part that we're going to talk through here is back to these bullet points, right? So no AI for problems that you haven't tried to understand first, and focus on learning patterns, not just fixing immediate issues. Now, when we talk about a more classic approach to learning software development, I will be the first to say, because I've been telling people this as long as I've been trying to mentor them. And that's probably in the neighborhood of like 12 plus years of trying to help other developers. Now, we haven't had AI like this for 12 plus years, but the point in the first part is really about trying to understand problems. So the idea is that if you're asking someone for help and always getting answers and you're not actually trying something first, you're probably not going to learn as effectively. I've made other videos about this in terms of asking good questions or how I coach other people to basically tell other people, go try something first. It's the same idea. In terms of learning, I think that it's very important that we have periods where we're getting stuck on things. Getting stuck, trying to work through the problem, do a bit of investigation, exploration, analysis, troubleshooting. All those things are super valuable for trying to learn more effectively. If we jump to the last part, when it says focus on learning patterns, this is the same type of thing where people will say you should learn the fundamentals, right? That means if you're going to go learn a programming language or a tech stack, people are saying you don't have to go memorize those things, because if you're learning the fundamentals of what you're doing, they'll be very transferable to other languages, other tech stacks, and that sort of thing. I think that when I read this last point, that's also what they're saying. And again, this is advice that I would be giving people already. Regardless of AI or not, those two things, the way I frame them, are how I recommend people learn. On top of that, practice, right? Go build things. I think that's the other piece of advice that I would always add in. Now, this is the part where it's going to feel a little bit awkward and a little bit challenging in terms of thinking about a different perspective. And the disclaimer that I'm going to re-add here is that I'm not even convinced that I align to this, but I wanted to say it out loud because I think it's interesting. And what that's going to be is that maybe this perspective in terms of learning software development, maybe that is becoming outdated. And I wanted to pause because I realized that might sound like, whoa, what the heck are you saying? And I realized that, and that's why I said I don't know if I totally agree with it myself. Certainly don't agree with it yet, but I'm keeping an open mind. I'm very curious if for the new wave of developers leveraging tools that we have today and how they're going to be getting more and more advanced, hopefully more and more accurate, and just kind of paving this new way of development, are we going to see a trend like we're seeing already where people are becoming more reliant and it's actually enabling them to become more effective developers. Again, I recognize that that's probably going to get some people triggered. I am waiting for the thumbs downs to come in on this video, but I wanted to say it out loud because I'm curious. I don't believe it yet, but I am trying to keep an open mind in terms of how this is going to unfold. The reason that I wanted to keep an open mind about this, though, is because I do try to help other software developers in terms of getting ramped up, in terms of learning more effectively. That's one of the reasons that I make these videos. I like being able to help others. Now, I need to keep an open mind myself because if this is the direction all of the tools are going, who am I to say that the way that I learned is going to be the most effective way for people going forward? The way that I tell people to learn is what I'm used to. This is what worked for me. And in fact, I do think that it would be helpful. However, I am not sure if I will be able to claim that it is the most effective way as we go forward. Part of this for me is an exercise in keeping an open mind. I'm very interested in following along to see if other developers are essentially becoming very effective and they are not abiding by this rule. They are using AI for problems they've never seen before. And you know what? They're doing it effectively, they keep doing it, and it's not really causing them problems. Or this last part, they're not learning the patterns for themselves at least the same way. They're basically trying to fix the immediate issues. Maybe they're seeing these patterns over a longer period of time, and they're just learning in a different way. Again, I'm not claiming this is a truth. I'm not claiming this is reality. All that I'm saying is that I'm very curious and trying to keep an open mind about it. In summary, I thought that this article was an awesome read. I thought that it was very interesting to see how this person is going to try and address their over-dependency on AI, but I think for myself, I have a couple of things that I don't necessarily agree with. The first is that I already do have a dependency, an extreme dependency on different tools and resources. Like, I was using Stack Overflow a ton before LLMs were around. I use other tools like IDEs and things, and I always have, and I always will. So I'm not super concerned about an over-reliance on tools, but that's my opinion. And then the second part is, like I was saying, I think the way that we are learning currently and sort of that traditional way, learning the fundamentals, right? Trying to make sure that we're getting challenged, getting stuck and navigating problems. I do think that that is really effective. I currently think it's the most effective way. However, I'm not totally sure that it's always going to remain that way with respect to some of the AI tools that we'll have going forward. Would love to hear your opinion on this. You're very welcome to disagree with me on these things because these are just sort of thoughts that I have and they're my opinion, but you will have your own too. So thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Take care.